Welcome back to the Anchored Podcast, the official podcast of the Classic Learning Test. My name is Soren Schwab, VP of Partnerships here at CLT, and today we're joined by Mr. Chris Weir. Chris holds a BA and MA in Theological Studies from Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, where he also served as the Special Assistant to the Vice President for Student Affairs and the Assistant Director of First-Year Programs from 2001 to 2005. From 2005 to 17, Chris served as the Director of Admissions, Director of Leadership Development, and Associate Director of Formation at Servite High School, an all-boys Catholic high school in Anaheim, California. While doing research for the founding of the Formation program at Servite, Chris discovered the nationwide renewal taking place within Catholic education, rooted in a rediscovery of the Catholic intellectual tradition. Since then, Chris has served as the Vice President for the Institute for Catholic Liberal Education, Assistant Principal of Holy Innocents School in Long Beach, President of Servite High School, and he is currently the Executive Director of the Camino Schools in Orange County, California. He and his wife Annie live in Long Beach and have 3 children, Mary Elizabeth, Magdalena, and William. Chris, such an honor to have you on today.
Great to be on the podcast, Soren. Thanks for having me.
Absolutely. As we always do, we're going to start talking about your own educational background. Talk to us a little bit about your K-12 experience. Where did you grow up? What kind of schools did you attend?
Sure, yeah. So I'm a cradle Catholic. Went to St. Hedwig's School in Los Alamitos, California for 9 years, K through 8, and then went on to Servite, where I later worked. But I am an alumnus and loved my Catholic education. But I think what I didn't realize at the time, I always assumed as a student, both in K through 8 and high school, that the school part was the same anywhere you went. My public school friends were experiencing the same thing in terms of the curriculum, the textbooks, and what happened inside the classroom, and but that the cultural differences were the main differences. And so when I discovered that there was more to that, that's sort of the light bulb that went off, that there's actually a difference to the philosophy and the pedagogy and the curriculum itself, which sort of woke me up. But loved my Catholic education and got a lot of great foundation from it, from the great people that were involved.
So you did K-12 all the way through Catholic, and then did you go on to you went on to Loyola? So you really are a product of
I know nothing but Catholic education. That's right. Yeah.
Well, it's fascinating, and I know we're going to talk about that a little bit more, especially with your new project at the Camino Schools. But you mentioned that it's the culture, but not the. I think that's probably true for a lot of Catholic schools, though, to this day, right? Where you walk in and it kind of seems like the curriculum, pedagogy, the one-to-one, right? Everything kind of looks like the public schools, but then it feels a little bit different. And I guess at some point you realize, oh, there's actually more to that, and we'll talk about that. Well, what you discovered, I guess, or rediscovered, is the kind of the Catholic liberal education. I know there's a on the Protestant side, they're more inclined to use the word classical, right? The classical renewal movement. On the Catholic side, it's more of a kind of a Catholic liberal education. How has that kind of evolved over the last 50 years? Kind of from your, I know you're not that old, but
right.
Your experience the last 100 years, Chris. No.
Yeah, right.
What have you seen once you discovered this, and what has been happening in Catholic education? Maybe related to this Catholic liberal education that I mentioned.
Sure. Well, it's funny you mentioned, I hadn't really thought about it before, but just even that mark of 50 years, I think my lifespan is such that 50 years is probably a good number to use, because I think a lot of the teachers that I had, their own, for many of them, Catholic education was sort of markedly different, I think. And so they were able to pass on a little bit sort of intuitively that was a little different. But then in sort of maybe the second half of that 50-year span, we've really seen where, unfortunately, and for no fault of their own, a lot of really well-intentioned Catholic educators who want to be at Catholic schools for all the right reasons, they don't know what they don't know, and they don't have sort of that thing that maybe some of the older generation had, that they sort of got it intuitively, and so they're not able to pass it on. They don't know what they don't know. So, but as far as Catholic liberal education, the liberal arts tradition, classical, yeah, I mean, I do agree with a lot of people on the Catholic side of things that sometimes that classical word can be more of a hindrance than a help. And the reason is because it allows people to step back and say, oh, that's classical. Okay. we can have a Catholic classical school in our diocese, and we could also have a Catholic STEM school and a Catholic fine arts school. And so it allows people to sort of box it in as this other thing, when in fact, like you said, to your point, what we're talking about when we say Catholic liberal education or classical or whatever it might be, what we're talking about is what Catholic education was for 2,000 years.
Yeah.
And we're simply drawing the distinction from what's only been around for about 100 years in that modern progressive education, which, like you mentioned, I think a lot of Catholic schools and Catholic educators sort of took in, again, for no fault of their own, but that just became the norm. And Catholic schools and pastors and bishops said, well, I want my Catholic school to be relevant and accredited, and I want my teachers to have credentials and to be certified. And that they didn't realize that all of that was taking in a brand new philosophy of education that had never existed before. So.
Wow, that's really powerful, and that, full disclosure, right? I'm the Protestant, so I'm not claiming to be an expert here, but talking to folks like Micah Vanecki, right? And I asked them about well then what is authentic Catholic education? And he's like, well, that's what we're talking about, right? I mean, that is Catholic liberal education. So in a way, it's from what you're saying, it sounds like the liberal arts / classical, whatever you want to call it, it's almost like it's been divorced from. How can you be a Catholic STEM school? But if Catholic tradition is the liberal arts tradition, then how is that even possible?
That's right. And let me be clear. I don't want anybody to think that there's anything wrong with STEM. But if you think STEM is the foundation, if you think that's why you're doing everything that you're doing, that's where you've gone awry. Now, there's people out there like Michael Ortner, who I know is friends with CLT, and others. And well, you see it with all the tech companies who are desirous of hiring liberal arts graduates because of the way that they can think and reason. So there's nothing wrong with STEM. It's just, what is your foundation? What is your end goal? If it's STEM, then you're missing the boat. And if you do want kids to succeed in something like STEM, they're far better off, with the foundation and the traditional liberal arts. Right. And so it's kind of frustrating that this thing that's only been around for about 100 years has now come to be seen as the norm, and we have to distinguish ourselves by calling ourselves classical or traditional liberal arts when we've got 2,000 years under our belt, if not more. So that can be frustrating, but hopefully one day it'll just be Catholic education again, and then the other will be called modern progressive education.
Yeah, and you're one of the leaders in that movement to. We talked beforehand. It's nothing like innovative or new. It's just going back to the roots, to ad fontes, so to speak. But I guess from my perspective, Catholic schools, I feel like even more so than kind of your ACSI Protestant schools, almost everything that they compete in, it seems to be kind of these competing in things that are more worldly, right? Whether it's, test scores, whether it's the number of AP classes, whether it's blue ribbon, all these things. And so I guess I don't blame some of these schools, right? Because that's what parents understand, right? They understand certain numbers, certain percentile, certain awards, versus the thing that I guess sets that's authentic Catholic education apart, right? And the impact that it has on the soul of the student. Well, that's really hard to, I guess, measure, right? And put on a website for marketing. So how do you, and you've been part, obviously, of Catholic liberal schools or classical schools. How did you approach that? And how do you think can Catholic schools make the case that this is the best education without falling into these kind of progressive categories of validating their success?
Right. It's a great question. For me, I think that the best way to convince anyone is for them to see the fruits of it, right? So if you're talking about, a parent who's considering whether or not to send their child to a school like this, you've got to get them on campus. And anytime you do, and the number one word that I've ever heard used to describe schools such as these is joy. The recognition of a true and authentic joy on the part of both students and teachers. Modern teaching in the modern progressive educational system is not a fun or joyful endeavor. it's soul crushing. And so I think the fruits are really what do it. And I think we just have to see this movement and the reestablishment of authentic Catholic education, we have to see it as a long game, right? Because what I've seen time and time again is that schools that unabashedly adopt this and move forward and really do well with it, things may not change overnight. In some instances, they do, but eventually these schools thrive and they flourish, and people see that firsthand, not only by coming on campus, but by interacting with their graduates, and they say, "What? These kids are different." And again, the first thing you notice is they're happy. They're not burdened by the anxiety and the depression and the social ills that so many kids are today that you hear about, all the reports about and the studies and statistics. So I think if we just commit ourselves to this vision of education, do whatever we can in our specific context at the school we're at or whatever, and just realize that the fruits will come. And they will spread like wildfire. We've seen that in countless schools across the country. So
yeah, and it seems like this movement is growing, and it's growing rapidly. And even when I joined CLT 5 years ago, and I would mention the ICLE and some of these schools, people would say, "Oh yeah, there's this one in Hyattsville, Maryland, right? That's St. Jerome. They have a cool story, but it's now one of so many." Now, I want to talk specifically about your time at Holy Innocents. I know your children still go there, because I think what I'm hearing a lot, and that's not just on the Catholic side, but in general, about kind of great books education or classical education, liberal arts education, is the sense that, oh yeah, but it's just for kind of wealthy suburban white, kind of this elitist. And of course we want to make the case that this is the best education for all children. But based on your own experience, how would you answer that?
First of all, I find the very question itself unbelievably. Oh shoot, what's the word? I've lost it. Hopefully you can edit this. I'm sorry, Soren. It's geez.
We can totally edit it, and you'll just
Yeah,
start back.
thank you. I'm sorry.
You'll
Yeah.
start back with the answer.
And it's a simple word. Why can't I think of this word when you're offended? Thank you. Offensive. Okay. I'll start over. First and foremost, I think the very question itself is offensive to all children. I mean, the idea. Well, let me back up. This kind of education, the whole purpose of it is that it is the best. It's the educational approach best suited for human flourishing. Okay, if that's the case, then why shouldn't it be accessible to all children? When you sit down and talk to a parent about what they want for their children, to your previous question about test scores and things that we measure schools by. I mean, some parents will say they're looking at those things. They want to know how many AP courses, but at the end of the day, every parent wants their child to be happy. Yeah. And if you sit a parent down and say, this is the education best suited to make your child happy, happy being themselves because they've discovered the truth of who they are, who God is calling them to be. They've been given tools and habits of mind and desires of heart to pursue that, and succeed in the pursuit of that. That should be accessible to everyone, and almost more so to the underprivileged. Because if you lack a leg up in all these other categories, then gosh, I hope at least we can give you an education that prepares you to succeed despite having some of those setbacks that maybe other children your age and in other contexts don't have. So I think we need to fight to give this to underprivileged children almost more than privileged children. I mean, we got to give them every advantage they have to become the people that God's calling them to be, that God created them.
So, and I mentioned, Hyattsville and St. Jerome and some of these early kind of schools that adopted this or reconnected with their kind of authentic Catholic roots, but there's so many now. Now, you're in a state that is maybe politically not known for some of these things, right? You're in California, but even there, this is happening. What have you seen in this movement the last 10, 15 years, maybe, that makes you hopeful, across the country, but particular too, where you're at in California?
Yeah, well, I think broadly speaking, the first, I think what first had a lot of parents interested in this and sort of attuned to it was that because our Catholic schools had sort of drifted to this modern progressive approach, the Catholicity sort of naturally took a bit of a back seat, and again, in most cases, not intentionally and with no, malintent. But so I think initially there was this desire of parents to see their Catholic schools be more Catholic, right? More intentionally Catholic. So that's what was happening, I think, kind of pre-COVID. That's what was driving a lot of parents and others to look into this. But then you have COVID. And gosh, Soren, at the beginning of COVID, if you ever told me I would ever use the phrase, one of the blessings of COVID, I wouldn't have believed you. But one of the blessings of COVID was that it lifted the lid, and really allowed parents to see it's not only about the Catholicity, but just the way that their children are being educated. So I think now what you have is parents, yes, a lot of them are very concerned with Catholicity, but you've also got a lot of parents out there that just go, I want my kids better educated than this, and they're drawn to the actual form of education, whether they're religious or not. So in the Catholic sphere, and certainly here in California, I mean, for me, it's personal. 6 years ago, my wife and I were trying to figure out what to do with our oldest daughter when she was about 3. Are we going to homeschool? Are we going to start a school? Are we going to move to a school? We looked to Orange County first. I'm an Orange County, kid born and raised, and there just weren't any options. So we looked elsewhere and we talked to lots of people, and there weren't very many options. And thank God we were led to Father Peter at Holy Innocents, and that led to a beautiful option there. But now you fast forward, and the Camino Schools are one of, probably about half a dozen options that didn't exist, just 6 years ago here in Southern California. So I'm just very grateful to be a part of, especially in a place like California, being able to offer families that desire it an alternative.
Yeah, that's fantastic, and what a great segue into your new project, so to speak. So you are now working as the executive director of the Camino Schools. Because how did you get involved with that project, with the schools? I guess, how did you find out? Walk us a little bit through the process that made you want to be part of it.
Sure. So I was at sort of a crossroads in my career. I had a handful of opportunities that I was sort of weighing. And to be honest, the first time somebody, I think, texted me a copy of the PDF sort of prospectus that the founding board members had put together just to start, spreading the word, among benefactors and others. And when I first read it, I was just, to be honest, I was completely overjoyed simply that this opportunity was coming to Orange County. Having gone through the personal experience that my wife and I did ourselves, I was just happy that it was happening. It was K through 8, which that's not typically my wheelhouse. I spent a couple of years with Holy Innocents with my own kids, but so when I initially heard about it, I didn't really think about it as an opportunity. But the more I discerned, I would say that probably the biggest, and I say this almost anytime I speak, probably the biggest light bulb moment in my career as a Catholic educator was when it finally sunk into me the difference between running a school and building culture, and that Catholic education is really about building culture, not running schools, right? And I think that's one of the fundamental problems in Catholic schools today, is that we've sort of just, unbeknownst to us, we've adopted this mindset of running a school, and it's really about building culture. So one of the things that the Camino Schools vision was very clear about is the unique power of schools to renew culture and to build culture. And that's really, at the end of the day, what drew me to the project, is that these people really understand the power of what a school can be in terms of renewing culture, and it was something I really wanted to be a part of.
So you're saying building culture apart from school culture. So through building school culture and then go out into the world and impact the culture at large. Is that kind of the ultimate goal?
Yes, that's the idea. And I guess, I don't know if I'd say apart from school culture. It's sort of building a community, building a culture around a school, right? Because some of the elements of great culture are solid families, solid formation, solid friendships. These things a school can uniquely sort of bring together, encourage, help develop, especially at a time like this when we have so many families who, Soren, I think because of what's happening around us, I think we have a lot of young families who desire something more. They know that they want more for their children and even more for their own families and more for themselves. But it's something that their parents probably weren't even given. In a lot of cases, it wasn't something they experienced themselves. They see this more out there. And I think a school like the Camino Schools is able to draw families like that together who have this common vision and this common desire for not only just their children, but for their entire families and themselves. Encourage that, give them tools, connect them with each other so that there's mutual support and camaraderie and encouragement and mutual learning. And so I think that the founders of the Camino Schools, I think, uniquely saw that schools can do that in a special way. You could have a lot of people say, hey, I'd like to renew culture. Well, how are you going to do it? Well, I'm going to start a foundation, or I'm going to do. But schools have a real unique ability, I think, to really, in a very powerful and almost a quicker way than a lot of other attempts, to really help build culture, build people up, so that yes, like exactly like you said, they can then go out and like a ripple effect, be that leaven in their workplaces or wherever they go to high school or college, or and hopefully again. We gotta believe in the long game. We're not going to see it. Some of us, I don't expect to see the full fruits of the Camino Schools in my lifetime, but I believe that they have the ability to have an impact 100 years from now. And that's why I want to be a part of it.
Oh, super encouraging. Talk to us a little bit about kind of the nuts and bolts. I think it starts with 2 schools, girls' school, all girls, all boys. Talk to us a little bit about curriculum and just some of the more specifics.
Sure. Yeah. So there's 3 distinctive sort of pillars of the Camino Schools. The first is the classical education. We want the educational component to be thoroughly classical. The second is character development, very intentional character development. Which again, good Catholic education, that would be implicit, right? But that everything we do, from the books that we choose for the children to read, to the activities that we participate in, to the way that we live the life of our school, that it's constantly about this development of virtue and character. And then the third component is spiritual growth, of course. And so the spiritual care of the Camino Schools will be entrusted to Opus Dei. And there's a handful of other Opus Dei affiliated schools around the country, which I know you're very familiar with, like the Heights in Potomac, Maryland, and its sister school Oakcrest. There's schools in New York, Boston, Chicago, Houston. So traditionally, a lot of those schools that I just mentioned, like you said, founded as 2 separate schools, girls' schools and boys' schools, because one of the distinctive features of these schools when it comes to character development is the recognition that all boy and all girl single-sex education can be a very powerful tool in character development. And so that's one of the distinctive features of most Opus Dei schools. So the vision of the Camino Schools is a little bit different in that it wants to bring both of those schools together under one umbrella, under one founding. So the model that we're pursuing currently is to have a co-ed K through 2 environment that then feeds a single sex 3rd grade through 8th grade for both boys and girls. And the girls would only have female teachers, 3rd grade through 8th grade. Boys would have only male teachers. So that's a very distinctive, I think. Just the way that we're structuring the school will be very distinctive in that regard, plus the classical, plus the spiritual care of Opus Dei. So,
would it be different campuses, or under one campus with different buildings?
Yeah, we're still, being in our infancy. There's been talk of both. I think a lot depends on the opportunities that get presented. That's the utmost priority of mine right now is finding a campus. I have a feeling it'll be more of a shared space, but a space that allows us to keep those 2 wings distinctive and able to set up an educational environment that is suited for girls and lets girls be girls, and similarly suited for boys and lets boys be boys. So.
Man, that's bold in California, right?
It is. Just to say that there's a difference is bold out here. So yeah,
you're rebels out there. Well,
that's right.
If any of our listeners, who knows, maybe they have connections, they're in California. How could they get in touch with the Camino Schools or with you if they want to get involved in this beautiful project?
Yes, please. So obviously the easiest is our website, which is caminoschools.org. And you can readily find, my email address, phone number. I would love to speak with anyone who is, and in particular, anyone who's maybe you're interested in the specific school endeavor, but just this, if you're interested in renewing the culture out here in California, we'd love to partner with you, whether that means you're a partner of the Camino Schools specifically or our broader, hope to be a part of a larger cultural renewal out here in California. We'd love to connect.
We at CLT, obviously we work with a lot of Catholic schools. So sometimes my colleague JP and I, we joke a little bit, St. Peter's School. Oh, which one? There's 100. St. John,
Right.
there's so
Right.
I don't know of any Camino schools. I don't know if you are the first one, but talk to us a little bit about the name and the rationale behind the name.
Yeah, I think, when you trace back the very founding culture of California, you go back to Saint Junipero Serra, and the El Camino, the road that forged the path of the founding of all the missions up the coast of California. And as we were talking a little bit before we started recording, the irony right now is I don't know that there's a state in the union that at first glance, just from the things that you see on paper, is more Christian in nature, from the names of our cities to the way we were founded. And so the irony is we've really lost that. And so I think the intention with calling ourselves the Camino Schools is that we want to go try to renew that and sort of draw from the inspiration and those the initial efforts out here in California that were early on so wildly successful, and try to bring that back and really tap into our roots out here in California.
Yeah, I mean, and just listening to you and maybe encourage our audience not to believe everything that they're hearing in the news about California. I feel the same about maybe it's true for Portland. I don't know. You hear a lot, but not long ago I had the founder of the John Adams Academies on the podcast, Dean Foreman.
Yes, I listened to it. Enjoyed that a lot. Yeah,
he talked so much about culture too, and the importance of culture. And then I think in a few weeks I'll be in Valencia, California, because there's a lot of classical Christian schools on the Protestant side, right? And they talk a lot about culture. So maybe we shouldn't always just look to our politicians, but what you're doing is from the bottom up, right? Create community on the local level and have that kind of be a vehicle for cultural change. So very excited about the Camino Schools and hope that our listeners are getting connected with you and certainly be rooting and praying for that endeavor.
Thank you.
We do have one more question, as we always do in the Anchored podcast.
Of course.
The hardest, I know, and I feel like we got to that point where almost everyone cheats. Like, well, I'm going to give you 3. Like, no, 1, just 1.
Yep.
If there's one book or one text that you can point to that has kind of had the biggest impact in your life, what would it be and why?
Yeah, and I am going to cheat. I'm going to give you one book like you asked, but I'm going to mention 2 documents before that. And the first is Gravissimum Educationis from the Second Vatican Council. And I mentioned that just because that was the first time, again, when I was at Servite, we were talking about this formation program, and I went back to church documents on education. That was my first wake-up call that, wait, the church is calling us to something that I did not experience in my 13 years, more than that, of Catholic education. So I think the church documents are important. The second would be the St. Jerome Educational Plan. When I read your question, really thought, I know this is the last question of the CLT podcast always, but when I really thought about how that has impacted your life, just a shout out to Michael Hanby and that group that wrote that plan. If that didn't happen, the Catholic part of this movement would not have proceeded the way that it did. And so, that leading to, the way it helped ICLE take off and the way that impacted my life, that was huge. But as far as the book, the one that I would say would be Beauty in the Word by Stratford Caldecott, because that just the opened up for me the richness of what's possible with this kind of education. It's a deep, spiritual, philosophical, very reflective book, but really helps you understand that if this is done well, this is soul changing for eternity. That's what it's all about.
Wow. And I echo what you said earlier. If people are unclear, like what's the difference between like your traditional versus your, just go visit a school.
That's right.
It just feels different. And so thank you so much for sharing. Again, we're here with Chris Weir, who's the Executive Director of the Camino Schools in Orange County. God bless you, brother, and all the best in your new endeavor.
Thank you, Soren, and thanks for all the great work that CLT does to help us in this movement. Appreciate it.